everyone. My name is Stephanie Adams. I'm a PhD student here at Nova Southeastern University in Conflict Analysis and Resolution. I'm going to speak about my paper, Apartheid versus Genocide and the Benefits of On-Site Research. Genocide and apartheid are horrific events that have occurred throughout world history. Genocide has been accepted throughout this time due to the dehumanization of life. This dehumanization and lack of care by the international community has led to events such as genocide in Rwanda and apartheid in South Africa. These events have also been directly affected by colonialism and religion. In this paper, I will compare the influences of colonialism and religion, the actions of the United Nations, and the media in the events of Rwanda and South Africa. In the book, Shake Hands with the Devil, Roméo Dallaire, a general over UN troops, describes his account of the Rwandan genocide. He was sent by the United Nations Assistance Mission for Rwanda to maintain peace while agreements were being established between the Hutu and the Tutsis. As his peacekeeping mission continued, a rise in aggression was stirred and his job to mediate the process and assist in providing a calm atmosphere collapsed. The aggression hit the ceiling once the president of Rwanda was killed in an airplane crash due to gunfire upon it. Dallaire attempted to gain approval from the United Nations to intervene before war began. However, he was continuously turned down and pleas for aid and orders to assist the Rwandan people. Instead, many turned their heads away from the conflict that was bound to erupt. As this time elapsed, Dallaire continued to see aggression progress and was given word of an extermination that would begin. A mass genocide was then waged upon the Tutsis, beginning by targeting any moderates, then through the usage of the identification card recognition. This recognition allowed individuals to know if an individual was a Hutu or Tutsi. Despite Dallaire's attempt to save lives, he was unable to stop the massacre of 800,000 Tutsis. Moments such as the French and the United States arriving into Rwanda to evacuate their countries, citizens from rising conflict proved that there was no sympathy for the Rwandan people in direct harm's way by the international community. Dallaire points out that if the troops from France, United Nations, the United States, and Belgium had merged together, there was a possibility in stopping the violence and gaining control in Rwanda. However, none of these countries pulled together, and instead made matters worse by the Belgian troops pulling out of Rwanda. These acts allowed the Hutu militias to gain power and view the stance of the international community. By the end of the genocide, most all UN forces had been removed, except for a few men who decided to remain without support nor supplies. Dallaire made various attempts during this time in Rwanda to entice media from all over the world to cover the events, but unfortunately was unsuccessful. This inability allowed the death count to continue to stack. Without the world showing any interest in the events, nothing would be done by the outside world. Rwanda would be left to deal with its own problems. In South Africa, apartheid was used by the Afrikaner National Party to oppress and segregate the black, colored, and white communities. This segregation led to the division in land which provided the white community 87% of the land. The whites hid behind self-determination to turn a blind eye to those blacks in need. Instead, they developed homelands for the blacks and determined them to not be citizens of South Africa. If there was any opposition to the NP, the government would either jail the person or force him to leave the country. This began to occur as the blacks began to rise up against the NP. Due to the continuous uprising and media coverage of the events, countries began to refuse exports to South Africa. The result began the transition by the NP away from apartheid and its attempts to continue to remain in power. The NP was able to remain in time through the transition of government due to its ability to create division among the black organizations. If colonialism had not come to South Africa nor Rwanda, there would not have been a mass genocide nor apartheid. In both instances, colonial powers attempted to suppress the large minority and in doing so created segregation of people, whether it be the blacks from the whites or color to the Hutus and the Tutsis. If the whites had not gone to South Africa, the South Africans could have developed their own prosperity from their mineral-rich lands, developed their own governments. The same goes for those that lived in Rwanda. If these people had not been put against each other, they could have worked together to develop their own community and governments by working together, and no real segregation would have been created of these people. The colonialists were knowledgeable in the ways to break down a community and gain power. The issue remains that if colonialism had not been brought to countries, genocide nor apartheid would have occurred. These countries would have been able to develop on their own in a peaceful manner without the pressures of segregation. During the times that apartheid reigned and colonialism flourished in Rwanda, the church had major effect upon the people that followed religion. Rather than the church denouncing the segregation of Hutus and Tutsis, instead it turned a blind eye to the differentiation of people. Rather than the church preaching the word of love, instead stood by and allowed apartheid in South Africa to continue to flourish. In many instances, the church took the side of apartheid. If the church had spoke out against apartheid and the segregation of Hutus and Tutsis, the effect upon the people could not be measured. The people placed their faith above other things and would have instead followed the word of God, bringing people together rather than tearing them apart. Despite religion's continuous talk of staying away from sin, the church was no better than its sinners and turned a blind eye, and promoted the continuous hatred by groups in power. The church was only self-interested rather than interested in the good of the supposed God's children. In these instances, the church is also to blame for the genocide and repression of people in apartheid. During Rwanda's mass genocide, for some reason the media was not fully involved in covering the gross atrocities occurring on a daily basis. However, in contrast, the media took direct interest in the rise up against apartheid. In one instance, people are being slaughtered, and yet no one could care the least. And on the other side, oppression is occurring, but major massacre are not. Neither genocide nor apartheid is right. However, it would seem that in the interest of humanity, the major coverage to stop a horrific event should be brought to place coverage upon genocide. Despite the world not wanting to see what truly is occurring in another country, it is a necessity to put in the face the death that no one is stopping. Once hell had broken loose in Rwanda, the media did not fulfill its obligation as a news source. Instead, the media allowed death to be spread on the streets of Rwanda while finally shedding the light to apartheid in South Africa. It is the media's obligation to assist in reporting of heinous crimes and getting the world to react. The United Nations' role began by sending troops into Rwanda in order to assist with peace agreement. Their placement would have allowed them to immediately assist and call to other nations to help in the prevention of the genocide. Despite their inability to act, the UN continued to turn a blind eye to the death that was occurring daily. This could be due to the chaos within the nation, rather than fully wanting to commit to the possibility of having to disarm an entire Hutu militia. They chose instead to turn away from these events. In comparison to South Africa's apartheid, the UN may have begun to act due to the controlled National Party government that held power. The UN probably had knowledge that if threatened trade sanctions and the stopping of imports, that would drastically affect the white party to change control. Therefore, change would begin and occur without violence or the usage of effort by manpower. In Rwanda, the UN would have to send troops to protect the Tutsis from their extermination. This could cost money to protect people that have nothing to offer for their lives. In mediation and peacekeeping missions, the article questions specific stories, events, and how peacekeepers handle situations. This article looks at events after they have occurred. The data that would be the most effective is those of real situations that have occurred and what was done. By possibly doing a study while the peacekeeping is being undergone, the researchers may be able to gain a better result of what would actually occur when events arose. For example, when Dallaire saw the events escalating, he went to the United Nations to seek assistance in mediation. Unfortunately, none was given to him, and the end result was, of course, an escalated situation due to the lack of mediation. Dallaire's choice in the midst of extreme conflict is vital to research to understand the players and complexity of events that occur in major international conflict. His account displays what real people do in situations when they feel that they are powerless and attempting to mediate. The major drawback is the use of memory used to reflect upon situations. However, if detailed notes are taken, a study could then begin. As a peacekeeper, there was little else Romero Dallaire could do. He had attempted mediation. He attempted to continue to make the environment a calm one, but as chaos began, all mediation could not be used to resolve the conflict. The point of no turning back had already been put into place. The Hutus had gained support and ammunition, and they had identified their enemies and knew their goal. Sadly enough, their goal being the extermination of the Tutsis left no room to stop the events from occurring. In mediation, both parties must be willing to openly work together to come to a resolution, or at least is open to the transformative process to transform the conflict. When there is a power imbalance, such as the one shown by the Hutu, they were able to bear arms and demolish the Tutsis. In doing this horrific event, the Hutus showed their power and aggression towards all human life. The Tutsis had become dehumanized and were meant for nothing more than slaughter. Peacekeepers are there to maintain order and help in mediation of conflict between parties. Perhaps there would be a major power imbalance in mediation, but this was already evident between the parties involved. Rather than fix the situation, Dallaire had to stand by. This is not the job of a peacekeeper. Despite direct orders, events would have been changed if he had chosen to fight back the Hutu in the protection of the Tutsis. In doing so, he may have been abandoned by the UN, or he may have gotten further attention by the media. By developing greater awareness of the situation, the UN peacekeepers are in harm's way. The world is more likely to listen to news and stir for action. Dallaire could have even gone the extreme other direction and began to arm the Tutsis. These people, for some reason, continued to be tracked and slaughtered. Dallaire could have devised a plan to get arms into Rwanda and began to assist in a rebellion against the initial acts of genocide. By the Tutsis also showing power and a will not to back down to the Hutu may have felt a bit of fear. The problem with the mass genocide that occurred was that the Hutu felt no fear from the Tutsis. This power imbalance led to the impossibility of full mediation and negotiation. Instead, it allowed the Hutu to set the stage and effectively carry out their plan. This plan of empowering the Tutsis may have led to bloodshed of both Hutu and Tutsis. However, the Tutsis would have been able to protect themselves and their loved ones. The Tutsis deserved also to be able to defend themselves from massacre. Then perhaps once the Hutu realized they were not in complete control, mediation could begin to develop mutual goals and, if necessary, a separation of land so that both sides could live in peace and harmony. This being said, the problem that continued to rise was that the Hutu were not looking for peace. Therefore, they may have continued in complete war with the Tutsis if they had chosen to revolt. The conflict could have completely escalated, and with the Hutu having outside support, the results may have been even more devastating. Military action may have begun in the protection of peace agreements, which was committed to by the groups in Rwanda. Once the president's plan in Rwanda was shot down, immediate action on the part of the UN could have stopped any further violence. The same goes in South Africa. For many years, nothing was done to stop apartheid. It was not until later, when the people continued to uprise, that any action was done. The UN has the ability to stop and prevent human rights violations. However, on many instances, it chooses not to intervene into state affairs. In conclusion, due to all of the failures from the oppression developed from colonialism, religion, the media, and the UN's lack of assistance and interest, hatred and repression was able to reign within Rwanda and South Africa in these people's greatest times of need. There is a necessity for research on mediation practices and peacekeeping to continue to develop and be studied. Some of the most valuable information for these researchers will be provided directly on the field. However, there is still much to be gained by other forms. The events of Rwanda will forever haunt the world. once the events were portrayed on a global level. The United Nations chose to allow the events, and due to this, should be shamed by the global community. This being the one union to protect those in need, failed to mediate and stop the genocide from occurring. The duties of peacekeepers are clear and unclear when conflicts such as Romero de Leyes arise. In these situations, what is ordered is not always right. As mediators, one must be able to think outside of the box in order to assist those in need. That's it. The more that other countries are able to get involved, rather than just what the superpowers want, I'm sure there would be more action put on by the global community. Absolutely.
And why do you think that the UN was very resistant to help Delaya?
Well, I think they were very resistant because of the financial costs that would go into sending manpower down there and, holding down an entire militia. I mean, yeah, just the cost in general and possibly backlash.
Thank you.